When a man mysteriously vanished in the city of Ibadan, Nigeria, his friends went looking for him in the forest, knowing the police likely wouldn't do much to help. After a worrying phone call, they feared the worst for their friend. Still, nothing could have prepared them for the absolute horrors they ended up discovering. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will cover topics that some might find disturbing, including murder and ritual sacrifice. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member and watch an uncut and ad-free version of this video, which features extra details and images that were unsuitable for this cut. On the 21st of March 2014, Kazim, a motorbike taxi driver known in Nigeria as an Okada, was taking a friend home when he received a call from another friend who sounded like he was in a hurry and needed a ride as soon as possible. I've actually heard various names given for this man, including Kazim, Abakuda, and Lanre. I don't know if they're all pseudonyms or nicknames or what, but we'll stick with Kazim. Anyway, Kazim explained that he could pick this friend up as soon as he dropped his other friend off. By the time he set off to collect the second friend, it was starting to get dark, and he didn't feel safe riding alone, so he asked his cousin to go with him. The two men didn't go home that night, and the next day, Kazim failed to show up at the place where all the Okadas in the area would hang around waiting for customers throughout the day. This group of Okadas all knew each other and were friends, so they'd notice pretty much straight away if one of them wasn't there. Earlier in the year, two other Okadas had disappeared. Police didn't really do much, and the rest of the group had searched the area themselves but found no sign of the missing men. Hours passed and no one heard from Kazim, and the other Okadas feared that he and his cousin had met the same fate as the other men, whatever that might be. After hearing that Kazim was missing, the first friend he had driven home the night before told the Okadas about the call from the second person urgently needing a ride to Soka, and that this person was likely the last person to have seen Kazim. The Soka area of Ibadan was quite a dangerous place, particularly at night, so it's hardly surprising that Kazim took his cousin with him. Residents in the area claimed that for years their complaints of criminal activity were ignored by police. It seems a little suspicious that the second friend seemed to be in a hurry, asking Kazim to pick him up as soon as possible, but still waited for him to drop off the first passenger rather than just calling another Okada, of which there were many. He specifically wanted Kazim to drive him to a dangerous area, and then Kazim vanished. The Okadas and Kazim's family had been searching the streets for him since they realised he was missing, but with Ibadan being the largest city in Nigeria by landmass, the odds were stacked against them, even with a rough idea of where he was heading the night before. They had tried calling him, but his phone was turned off. They were starting to lose hope when suddenly one of the Okadas received a call. It was Kazim. He was hysterical and explained that he was with 8 other people he didn't know, and they'd all been kidnapped and brought to some underground space. The kidnappers had taken all their belongings, but didn't realise that Kazim had a second phone, which he was using to make the call now. He didn't know exactly where he was, but it was somewhere in the Soka Forest on the outskirts of Ibadan. He managed to give directions to a footpath that led into the forest, marked by 2 broken down cars, and said if the Okadas followed the path, eventually they should hear him and the other 8 people screaming. The group of about 40 Okadas immediately set off towards the forest, following the directions they'd been given until they found the two cars. They followed the narrow path into the forest in single file until all of a sudden a man jumped out of the bushes and began shooting at them. They rushed out of the forest, got back on their motorbikes and speeded back to the city centre, planning to return with a bigger group. Around 60 more Okadas agreed to join them, and the group of over 100 men returned to the forest, this time armed with guns, knives and other weapons. The first time, they had tried sneaking through the path, hoping not to attract any attention, but now they wanted to appear more intimidating, so were shouting and causing a scene. The plan worked, as no one came to attack them this time. At the end of the path, there was a river, and when they spotted Kazim's motorbike under the bridge, they knew he couldn't be too far away. Across the river, there were a few dilapidated buildings, and as the group approached, they heard screams coming from one of these buildings. At this point, they received another call from Kazim, who said he could hear footsteps above him. The group took this to mean that they must be close, and so they broke into the building, and what they found was horrifying. Around 20 people were chained to the walls. They were all severely malnourished and had traumatized expressions on their faces. Surrounding them were various bones, some with chunks of flesh still attached. After a moment of paralyzing shock, the Okadas began cutting the chains to free the captives, some of whom bolted the second they were free, others were catatonic. Kazim was nowhere to be found here, so the group decided to search the other buildings nearby. On the way, they found piles of human skulls, rows of unmarked graves, and trails of dried blood. One of the buildings was a shack that was filled with hundreds of items of clothing, shoes, and bags. There were even school uniforms and baby clothes, suggesting that children had been murdered here too. Another building contained possibly hundreds of dead bodies in various stages of decomposition, and some were missing limbs or their heads. It was also shocking that the Okadas almost forgot their reason for being there in the first place. They had expected to find a few people who had been kidnapped the day before, not this many people who had been chained up and neglected for God knows how long, surrounded by the remains of hundreds of people that hadn't survived. Kazim had sent a couple of messages to members of the group, and at one point during the search, he called them to say he could still hear footsteps above him, so the Okadas must be close, but his phone was about to die. The call cut off, and they tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. Kazim hadn't been able to give his precise location, but he was sure he was underground, so the group began digging. They dug so many holes around the area but couldn't find him, or any sign of any underground place where he might be held. When they first noticed Kazim was missing, the Okadas didn't see much point in contacting the police. It's not like they cared when the other two Okadas had gone missing earlier in the year, so they likely wouldn't have done anything to find Kazim either. But after the horrifying discoveries they had made, showing that whatever was going on here was so much bigger than an isolated abduction, they had no choice but to involve police. By the time police arrived at the scene, many of the captives had run away. A few remained, but they were so weak and malnourished that they could barely move, and one of them dropped dead right in front of the officers, leaving only 6 alive. Some of the captives were homeless and mentally ill, with no one to have noticed they were missing in the first place, but there were many like Kazim, who had families and friends who had reported their disappearances, yet police seemingly hadn't bothered to investigate. In the shack with all the clothes and shoes, there were also items that might indicate when some of the people had been abducted, such as a driver's license from a 52-year-old man that expired in November 2006. Other items suggested that whatever was going on here had begun at least 10 years ago. It wasn't just local people that had been kidnapped and held captive in the forest. For example, a 72-year-old woman named Cecilia had been abducted near her home in Edo State, around a 5.5-hour drive away, and was chained up in that building for 6 years. The toll it had taken on her was evident. At first, no one was able to communicate with her. She was speaking in a strange language that sounded like gibberish, and when she was given a bottle of water, rather than drinking from the bottle, she poured it into a bowl first. Some of the victims were unable to speak at all, and those that could weren't able to give many details. They said that new captives were brought to the site pretty much every day, and they'd witness people being brutally murdered, dreading the day that it would be their turn. They didn't know who had brought them all there or why, and after a while they stopped questioning it. They had no chance of escaping, and the hope of being rescued diminished with each passing day. Although the clearing in the forest appeared to be quite a desolate area, there were people living and working not too far away. They had seen what they described as posh vehicles at the site of the crimes, and even frequently heard screams. While some reported it to the police, who apparently did nothing, others had been told that the buildings were some kind of psychiatric facility, and the people were screaming because they were mentally ill, not because anything sinister was going on. Some claimed to be surprised to learn what was going on though, stating they never saw or heard anything amiss. This has led to some speculation that locals may have been involved in it, or at least bribed or threatened to keep quiet about it. As far as the families of the victims knew, their loved ones had simply vanished. There were no calls demanding a ransom or anything. So why were so many innocent people abducted, chained up, and eventually murdered in the Soka Forest? I said before that police didn't really bother to investigate the disappearances of the 2 Okadas that had gone missing earlier in the year. This is frustrating enough, but surely when faced with the magnitude of the Forest of Horror, surely they'd have to do something now. Shockingly, this discovery was met with more or less the same reaction. The Okadas begged police to dig up the area to find Kazim and the other captives he was kept with, but they refused. They cordoned off the area for a couple of days, arrested a few suspects, then demolished the building the captives were in, and basically just left as if nothing had happened. Most who were responsible for the atrocities had fled by the time the Okadas went back in a bigger group to search for Kazim. There were no guards or gunmen, and it doesn't sound like police tried very hard to find them. The Okadas returned to the site every day for a couple of weeks, digging up as much land as they could by hand, desperately searching for their friend, knowing they were his only hope now. A couple of days after they had discovered the captives, they noticed a man walking around in the area, acting suspiciously, so they confronted him and discovered he had dozens of SIM cards in his pockets, and more disturbingly, several human tongues. Concluding he must have been involved, they killed him immediately. It seems he was the only person who ever suffered any consequences for the death and torturing of possibly hundreds of people. Because none of this was ever investigated, no one knows for sure why it was happening, but there is a pretty plausible theory. In Nigeria, belief of witchcraft and rituals is pretty widespread. There are herbalists who you can pay to perform rituals for money, health, longevity, and other things. Many of these rituals involve things like hair clippings and other things that the customer can easily obtain. Some involve animal parts or require an animal to be sacrificed. Others need human body parts, organs, teeth, toes, blood, even heads. Since some of the parts that need to be provided for these rituals would result in the death of the person paying for it, so there wouldn't be much point, they need an unwilling victim. It's thought that hundreds of people are kidnapped around Nigeria every year and sacrificed for these rituals. They are often sold out by friends or family, as it's speculated might have happened to Kazim when he took his friend to Soka. Some are even killed by friends and family in their DIY money rituals. according to ritualkillinginafrica.org. In Nigeria, there are various tales around wealth creation that foster the concept of one becoming rich through the manipulation of metaphysical forces in nature. This has drawn many into desperate measures, including taking the lives of close family members and friends. In December 2021, a suspected internet fraudster from Edo State, identified as Osas, allegedly murdered his girlfriend, Elahor Oniarosa, for ritual purposes. In November 2022, another Yahoo boy, alongside his herbalist, was arrested after policemen recovered suspected human parts at the herbalist place in Obiaruku in the Okwane local government area of Delta State. But Ogun State appeared to have the highest number of reported incidents of such killings. For instance, the state recorded at least 15 cases of ritual killings between January 2022 and 2023. In January, the Ogun State Police Command arrested a 36-year-old herbalist, Taiwo Ajalorun, who reportedly confessed to the gruesome killing of a 26-year-old mother of two and two others in the Ijebu-Ode area of the state. On December 28, 2022, a gang reportedly killed 3 women, including a girlfriend of one of them after sleeping with her. In February 2022, 2 suspected criminals who were alleged to be ritualists were set ablaze by an angry mob for being in possession of human parts. Also, in October 2022, 2 suspected internet fraudsters allegedly killed a 40-year-old man. But probably the most pathetic was that of some teenagers who were caught burning the head of a female, Sophia, whom they killed for money ritual. One of the teenagers, who was Sophia's boyfriend, said in January 2022 that he learnt the practice through Facebook. He said he typed "how to make money ritual" on Facebook and got the details, adding that the link instructed him to behead and burn a female skull in a local pot. In 2022, Punch, a popular newspaper in Nigeria, did an investigation into money rituals in Ibadan. Their correspondent posed as a customer who was desperate for cash and contacted a herbalist named Ifatunde Oladipupo on Facebook, where he had been openly advertising his services. Here are a few excerpts from the article. Excited by the call from not only a new client, but one ready to go the whole hog, Oladipupo, with no holds barred, revealed and explained coded traditional terminologies, which he said were only known by money ritual underdogs. Punch investigators gathered from him that various types of money rituals had their attached consequences. Oladipupo said that the 2 in high demand were one which required human parts and another prepared with animal parts. Following promises by our correspondent to ensure a huge return after hitting it big and sensing his desperation, the herbalist voluntarily opted to prepare the money ritual with human parts. While still marketing the extraordinary potency of this particular charm, he warned that it would cost quite a lump sum of money. Still, he refused to divulge the amount on the phone. He later gave our correspondent an address in Ibadan for a physical meeting to finalize the arrangement. Meeting days later, Oladipupo ranted about popularly held perceptions on the potency of money rituals and boasted about a sizable number of Nigerians he had made stupendously rich. The conversation, which was more of a self-advertisement, appeared to be a mind-playing gimmick meant to mentally prepare our correspondent for what was ahead. He said, "The money ritual is real. Some are more potent and effective than others. I have done so many money rituals. From Abuja to Abakaliki, I transfer the charms. I have clients abroad and send the charms through courier," he boasted, with a glint in his eyes. Oladipupo said he relocated to Ibadan from Ogun State because of the huge patronage he enjoys from mostly young internet fraudsters. He said, "I have more customers in Ibadan than Ijebu-Ode. You know that a prophet is not respected in his own town. I have customers that sometimes lodge in hotels for weeks, and when it's time to eat the concoction made for them or to collect the charms, they will come to my place. 2 friends came to me from Abuja and another from Abakaliki. I posted about them on my timeline, he said. Delving deeper into the mystery, Oladipupo explained what each money ritual entailed and asked our correspondent, "Do you want the one that will yield money immediately, or that which would make people start rendering monetary favours to you?" There is money-making soap that will be prepared for you with parts of a dead body. When bathing in it, the dead body will appear. You may not see the spirit, but you will hear words like, "Give me my head" or "Give me my flesh," depending on the part used. The potion prepared with body parts is more potent than those made with the head of lizards or other animals. Our correspondent asked for the cost after Oladipupo's earlier advice to go for the money ritual prepared with human parts due to its efficacy. "It will cost you 250,000 naira. I am offering you this charm at a cheap price. If you can get me the money, you will have so much money within 1 week. You will see money and become afraid," he blurted with accompanying incantations. The herbalist further boasted that the charm prepared with human parts can last for 3 years, adding, "By the time it expires, you would have made more than enough money." Asked if there are accompanying repercussions, Oladipupo answered, "Since you were not the one that killed the person, there won't be any problem." Pretending to be pleased and convinced, our correspondent asked Oladipupo for his bank details, promising to transfer the amount needed for the money ritual once he gets to Lagos. 250 Nigerian naira is currently about £117 or $152. The conversion rate has decreased significantly since 2022, so I think at that time it would have been closer to $300, but still, it's crazy that that's the value of a life to these herbalists. $300 is worth kidnapping a person and killing them for a ritual that doesn't even work. Of course, this amount of money goes a lot further in Nigeria than it would in the UK or the US, and with a high unemployment rate, many people are living in poverty and are desperate for money. But there is really no justifying the atrocities involved in money rituals using human body parts. If the herbalists are selling these rituals for $300, the people that are selling their friends and family to the herbalists must be making significantly less than this. The article continued. Before taking his leave, pretending to be worried, our correspondent asked the herbalist how he intended to source the human parts required for the money ritual. He dismissively answered that he was unaware, but later said it could be harvested from accident victims or dead bodies. After a deep thought, the herbalist claimed to also source from herb sellers and from old members of Oduduwa People Congress. In order not to arouse suspicion by probing further, our correspondent left with a promise to transfer the 250,000 naira. However, 3 days later, instead of returning with the money, our correspondent called to make an odd urgent request to procure a human toe for personal reasons. Without hesitating, Oladipupo promised to contact his supplier and revert back on the price and mode of delivery. A few minutes later, he called back with the news that the toe could be delivered at any location. The herbalist was ready to act as a middleman to broker the deal. He revealed that it would cost 50,000 naira, but after negotiation, the duo settled for 40,000. "Once you send the money and it is confirmed, I will get it from the supplier and bring it to your place. If you send the money today, I will bring it to Lagos today. My delivery fee is 5,000, he said. Punch investigators, however, aborted the mission by not contacting Oladipupo, as it was unclear where the toe would be sourced from. The herbalist claimed that the body parts could be taken from victims of accidents or already dead bodies, and while this might be true for some, it's undoubtable that many of the parts come from people who have been kidnapped and murdered for the practice. He even said to the correspondent earlier that there would be no consequences because he wasn't the one killing them, implying that someone else was. In some cases, it's probably a lot easier to abduct living people than it is to find people who have recently died. Also, it sounds like a key part of some of the rituals is the actual sacrifice of a person, and I don't think it would count as a sacrifice if the person was already dead. The Punch correspondent also contacted another herbalist who was prepared to do the ritual with human parts for just 40,000 naira, or about $50 at the time. It's really shocking to think that human beings are being treated like commodities and sold at about the same price as a meal for two in a restaurant. It seems likely that the people held captive in the Soka Forest had been kidnapped to be used in money rituals. Many of the corpses that were found in one of the buildings were missing parts of them, and the piles of disembodied skulls from outside suggest that the rest of the bodies they were once attached to had somehow been made use of. The people who were chained up had witnessed the removal of body parts from other captives, as well as their murders. It's also possible that their organs were harvested to be sold illegally for purposes other than money rituals. Many suspect that the police knew what was going on in the forest long before the Okadas reported it. Whether they knew and turned a blind eye, or were being paid off to ignore it, I don't know, but their reaction afterwards, to demolish the buildings and leave the site as if nothing happened, would be inexplicable if they didn't have a reason not to investigate further. It's all just too much to chalk up to incompetence. As far as I'm aware, no one has ever been convicted of any crimes related to this operation, so those responsible are likely still out there to this day, perhaps continuing their crimes in a different location. If Kazim didn't disappear on that night in March 2014, the atrocities in the Soka Forest likely would have gone unnoticed for much longer. It had started at least 10 years ago, so who's to say it wouldn't have lasted another 10 years? Maybe it'd still be ongoing today. Tragically, Kazim, his cousin, and the other 8 people he was held captive with have never been found. Who knows if they were later taken to another location or just left to die where they were. The Okadas spent weeks digging up the area by hand and still found no sign of their friend. Had the police done their job and actually made an effort to find these people, there's a good chance Kazim would still be alive today. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any suggestions you might have for a future video. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.